All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s, when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. What is Odoo? Well, Odoo is an all-in-one management software with apps for every business need. Odoo has apps for CRM, accounting, sales, HR, inventory, manufacturing, and everything in between. And they're all in one easy-to-use software. And the best part about Odoo? All Odoo apps are integrated, helping you get things done faster and more efficiently. So, when you think about business, think Odoo. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, September 14th, 1971, Attica Correctional Facility near Buffalo, New York is, I guess, relatively speaking, calm on this day and stable. But in the prior 4 days, an uprising had rocked the complex. 39 people killed, including 29 prisoners and 10 prison guards. Days of violence, hostage-taking, more. The Attica Revolt would become a huge news story, a cultural touchstone, and it would open up a conversation about the horrific conditions inside American prisons that, well, we'll discuss how much that conversation has led to actual change then and now. But here to do that, as always, are Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And our special guest for this episode is Heather Thompson, professor at the University of Michigan and author of the book Blood in the Water, the Attica Uprising of 1971 and its Legacy. Heather, welcome to the show. Thanks for doing this.
Great to be here.
So when you read accounts of the revolt, they often say that they were, quote, unplanned, and you hear that. It was an unplanned revolt. I'm just curious kind of what you make of that framing of that word, and I guess that's also a chance to talk a little bit about how this 4-day uprising began. Was it truly unplanned?
Well, I mean, it depends how you think about it. I mean, it was not some diabolical masterminding of militants the way that the state of New York would have you believe, in terms of it had no purpose, it had no reason, it was meant to just simply destabilize the U.S. government. But it absolutely was unplanned in the sense that it was an eruption that happened when it happened because of some missteps, some agitation on the part of the actual prison officials. That said, it was absolutely inevitable. The men inside were suffering mightily back in 1971, the way that prison folks are suffering today tremendously 50 years later. The places were hellholes in 1971 as they are today. These men were being fed on 63 cents a day. They were given a roll of toilet paper a month. They had abysmal medical conditions. These institutions were brutally racist. These folks were being kept in their cells way too many hours every single day, being forced to labor for pennies a day. And everybody in that place had been telling prison officials something has got to change. They had been actually trying to work through the system, telling state officials, writing letters, trying to get some measure of basic human rights in this facility. and really working across political lines, organizing in the yard, trying to make this place more humane in every manner they could imagine. When it actually jumps off on September 9th, that was not planned. But was it inevitable? Absolutely. And on this day, September 14th, 1971, while the world thinks things are calm, in fact, the men inside are paying a brutal price for having dared to uprise. They are being tortured. They are being maimed. They are, some of them have been shot 6 and 7 times. But you're right, the nation doesn't know this, and that's because everyone's been lied to. Everyone has been told the prisoners are animals, that they are the ones responsible for what's happened inside of this facility. They're the reason why this has gone so wrong. That lie is going to take this nation down a political path from which we are still paying an enormous price called mass incarceration. And so this is an example of we get our history wrong, we get lied to. Not just the Attica brothers paid a price for that, but every single American is still paying a price for that.
So this, I mean, I don't even know where to start. There's so much.
It's heavy.
It's heavy. It's intense. Even though we know about Attica is everywhere, right? The harsh prison sentences, the harsh treatment that people who are incarcerated are experiencing is this is not an exception in some ways. This is, I mean, across the board, being incarcerated is inhumane, especially in the way that it's done in the United States. But to see how a lot of the grievances of these men who are incarcerated was sort of dismissed, ignored, maligned, I think is what's just most heartbreaking to me when you realize just how awful they're being treated.
Well, what's really incredible is that we have accepted this idea that it is okay to throw money hand over fist at institutions that we actually own, the public, we actually trust to do the right thing with absolutely no accountability. And imagine a situation where these were, say, public schools. Would we hand money over, the biggest bill ever in American history, and just say, you know what, close the doors, lock them, do whatever you want inside. You can have the highest rate of failure imaginable. You can do whatever you want to the people inside of it, and we're just going to keep on handing you money. We don't need to go inside. We don't need to see what you're doing, but we're going to just trust that whatever you're doing is okay. That's what's happening in our prisons. It's what was happening in 71, but here's the difference. In 71, if you look at polling data, people were starting to wake up to it. When Attica's happening, the American public, even random people in the middle of small town America, are going, wow, really? That's what's going on? There was a measure of sympathy. The death penalty was actually on its way out. People are starting to feel like prisons really shouldn't be warehouses. We're starting to get a feeling that maybe we should start to humanize this. People are kind of supporting things like Miranda rights. This idea that maybe this system is not working is actually, people are feeling it, right? Yeah. The fact that we take this abrupt turn is by design. It is created. And if you want to look at these pivot points, where it's created in the 1960s and 70s. It's created in these apocryphal moments like Attica, where people actively have to shift the narrative by saying, you know what? Whoa, you didn't just see what you saw. No, it actually wasn't law enforcement that was violent. It was the prisoners who were violent. It wasn't the National Guard who was violent. It was the students at Kent State who were violent. Oh, wait, it wasn't the anti-war protesters or the police who was violent. It was the anti-war protesters who were violent. And it's sort of these shifting of narratives that do a tremendous amount of work in taking us down a different political path.
Well, and because of the importance of narrative and public opinion to this story as it unfolds, I was wondering if we could maybe talk about what's actually happening inside the prison when this breaks out, because this question of whether it was planned or not, the story, as I understand it, is that there had been this rumor circulating around that a prisoner had been killed the night before. And there's this moment where, because of this is a rundown prison with a lot of broken systems, a bunch of inmates get trapped in a tunnel, and they're terrified because they are surrounded by these brutal and violent guards. They don't know what's going to happen. And that's the moment that begins to trigger this uprising. Can you take the story from there and let us know what happens inside of Attica during this uprising?
Exactly. So essentially, you can imagine this is a prison. There's a tremendous amount of fear on everybody's part. The incarcerated men are terrified of the guards. The guards are terrified of the incarcerated men. It's a bastion of fear on all sides. And prison management gets the bright idea on the morning of September 9th that because they are angry at certain men from an incident the night before, they're going to not let them go to rec hall that morning after breakfast. So rather than let them go out this normal door in A tunnel that morning, they're going to lock that door to A tunnel that's going to normally take them out to A yard. And instead, they're going to have to not go out that door and go back to their cells. The problem is they don't tell the guards that door is going to be locked. They don't tell the men that door is going to be locked. So imagine a situation in this tiny tunnel. You've got these guards managing these lines of about 80 men, and the door is locked. And everybody's panicked. Nobody knows why the door is locked. The incarcerated men think that they're about ready to be attacked by the guards. The guards have no idea why this door is locked. They think that perhaps they're about ready to be ambushed by the men. All hell begins to break loose. Everyone's backing away from each other, trying to arm themselves with whatever they have. Fists start flying. It's a completely terrifying, chaotic scene. But in that moment, it just so happens that a gate comes crashing down because it has a faulty weld in it. This institution is built in the height of the Great Depression, 1931. It is an archaic institution. The gate comes down. The gate comes down right at the nerve center of the prison, which is Times Square. It allows everybody to access all of the prison. And within 15 minutes, the entire institution is under control of all of the prisoners. But of course, the phones are archaic. Nobody can get a hold of anybody else. Nobody can get anybody on the line. And so everyone is terrified. People are exacting revenge on guards who had been brutal. People are grabbing hostages as a measure of protection for themselves. You can imagine in that moment, it is nothing less than a riot. And you can use that word freely, and it's accurate. But here's the deal. Cooler heads prevail. All of that political organizing had been, had borne fruit. The men realize this is a toxic, dangerous situation. They move everybody outside into D Yard, one of the outdoor exercise yards. And then something extraordinary happens. A real exercise in participatory democracy. They move everybody outside. They elect men to speak for them out of each of the cell blocks. They do have hostages, but they've released the injured guards to get medical care. They surround the remaining hostages with prisoners to make sure they're protected. And then they start negotiating with the state of New York for basic human rights.
Yeah, it is this remarkable moment, but then it turns bloody and terrifying pretty quickly. Do you blame that on the state of New York coming in pretty ham-fistedly into this situation from the outside?
Well, we now know a lot that we didn't know at the time. And we now know that while these 4 days and 4 nights of negotiations are going on, meanwhile, about 600 state troopers are descending on Attica from all over the state, and off-duty corrections officers and park police and Genesee County sheriffs and parks, you name it. Every member of law enforcement is showing up. they are getting angrier and angrier. They're being fed on rumors from the FBI. And we now know that the state of New York, in particular, Governor Rockefeller, really had no intention of letting this end peacefully. I was able to find documents that really, in my view, conclusively prove that this was never going to be allowed to end peacefully. And so on the fifth day, when this is clearly possible to end it peacefully, when the hostages make clear that they want this to be settled because they can see the rationale for these improvements themselves, they're going to send in these men with their own weapons, state-issue weapons. They're not going to send them in until everyone has already been felled by CN and CS gas, which, by the way, is a powder. It's clinging to people's mucous membranes. They are vomiting. They are blinded.
Goodness.
They are already completely unable to fight back. And they don't have any weapons. They have, sticks and, homemade shanks and so forth, but they don't have any firearms. And that's when they come in guns blazing, and it is a massacre.
And the 10 people who die, originally, right, the state claims that they were killed by prisoners, and it turns out that all 10 of them were actually shot by police.
And that's the key, right? Because that story is the story that is first told in that first half an hour outside of the prison, where the media is assembled from around the world. And that story goes out, and here's what's key, because this is the rubber meets the road. That story goes out on the front page of the New York Times, the LA Times, and because it goes out on the UPI and AP, it goes out to every small town newspaper in America that the prisoners killed the hostages, that they actually castrated one of them and shoved his testicles in his mouth. And of course, remember here, the white media does not even need to corroborate this story because it fulfills their racist imagination. This is a lynching narrative that they just believe. And that story gets corrected, but it's too late.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
But wait, sorry, that detail about the castration was made up whole cloth?
Completely. Wow. It was a bald-faced lie. And they not only lie, but they say they saw it with their own eyes and they had footage of it.
The thing that's so amazing about that is that it's this visceral tale of just the most grotesque violence. It doesn't happen. But as you were talking about earlier, on September 14th, what's happening inside the prison is actually this deeply cruel and grotesque set of tortures that the people who are imprisoned are going through. And you wonder about the level of just sadism that infuses both the story that's told to the world, but also describes the conditions that are actually happening that people aren't hearing about.
And racist. We have to be really, really clear here. It isn't just that this is society against prisoners. This is punctuated at every turn by racist sadism. The man who is accused of the castration is a huge man. His nickname, his self-appointed name was Big Black. He was a huge guy. He was the captain of the football team and head of security. That is who they fingered as the man who had castrated one of the guards. That is who laid on a table for 6 hours. That they put a football under his neck, and they said if it dropped from his neck, that they would shoot him in the head. He had every reason to believe that was true. They dropped shells on him. They tortured him for hours. Goodness. And they took pictures of it. The state police took pictures of this, and they watched people paraded around and just watched this happen for hours and hours and hours. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. So, and in there was a lot of white prisoners in this institution, we should know. And every one of them that was tortured in the subsequent days and weeks, every beating they got was punctuated by a racial epithet for having stood with the Black inmates that were in there. So again, this is, to your point, Nicole, this was so punctuated by the reverse, as of course all racist violence is, right? It's the white racial imagination that is, in fact, punctuated by their own race, racist violence.
This is just like, I wonder, and this is a question I just have about, because I know you've conducted copious interviews, and I mean, the level of research that it took to produce this astounding book is just, first of all, bravo to you for that. But can you talk about some of the interviews that you conducted, what either what the common sort of theme or narrative was from the people that were incarcerated, how they, I hate to use the word recovered from this, or how they got through this?
Well, I have to say, the irony of doing this book is that the research journey could be a book unto itself. It took 13 years to do this book, in part because you should also know that the state of New York still has not opened the records. When I started this book, I was deeply naive. I just assumed as a historian, and we know the story, Kellie, right? We just, we all know this story as, academics. You think we're going to go in the archives. We're going to write this book. Well, I didn't understand that, there's no statute of limitations on murder. The state of New York still hasn't opened this story. So it was a journey to figure out who had the copy, who had the original. I lucked out. I came upon documents they didn't know was there. That's how I was finally able to name shooters after 45 years that had been protected. That's how I finally was able to know the depth of the cover-up. But I could never have actually told this story without people sharing, as you just said, their personal trauma. And so I could have bumbled my way into this. And you'll notice in my book, I call them conversations. I just bumped into myriad conversations with people because it was too traumatic. Yeah. It was too raw, and people had to be able to just say, I can't talk about this, or I don't want to talk about this, or I just told you something, but absolutely that can't be in the book, or absolutely I can't even imagine including that, because this is, of course, continued trauma. It is ongoing because the state of New York still will not apologize.
Yeah. So that controlling of the narrative, continues to this day. Yeah. I'm curious if we can just talk a little bit about this as a cultural touchstone and at that time and ongoing. Kellie and Niki don't know this, but I'm on a quest to name drop every Sidney Lumet movie over the course of our series. And so, of course, Dog Day Afternoon, one of my favorite movies of all time. There's that famous scene where Al Pacino, who's in a hostage situation of his own, starts chanting Attica, Attica. I'm sure you get this question all the time about that scene, but what does that represent of this as a touchstone moment where it can be included in a movie like that? And moreover, we have this controlled narrative on the one hand, right? But then we do also seem to have, as you were hinting at, this real sense, maybe in a sort of broader, more diffuse cultural sense of, well, let's think about what's going on inside of our prisons. So just paint that cultural landscape at the moment.
I think it's really, really interesting how Attica has really a dual legacy and a dual cultural touchstone, if you will. On the one hand, everything that we've just been talking about is so fundamentally true, which is that Attica, to so much of America, represents the worst of the worst. It represents all that is wrong with, quote unquote, Black America, prisons, crime, violence. If you want to just connote criminality and the worst of the worst, you just use the word Attica. And in that sense, Attica comes up culturally it comes up on The Sopranos as a reference. It comes up in SpongeBob SquarePants, the cartoon. It comes up in rap lyrics in the 80s and 90s to kind of mean kind of the end of the road, the gangsta violence, the worst of the worst in some respects. On the other hand, it also has a different kind of touchstone legacy. It's about resistance. It's about one of the most incredible, extraordinary legal defense efforts in American history. My book is a third about the Uprising, but it's also the whole rest of it's about the fight for justice that follows Attica. And I mean, the fight to defend the Attica brothers, I think, is a legal defense effort that truly rivals any other in American history, probably even more kind of Herculean than even that of the Scottsboro Boers or anything else. So it also is a touchstone for resistance. It is not accidental that every prison uprising today, the most recent, the St. Louis jail uprising, it's Attica, Attica, Attica that people still chant. Prison strikes today, it's all about Attica. And the Sidney Lumet film was a very interesting kind of bridge moment. 1975 was this kind of cusp year, right? I mean, on the one hand, there's this desperation that Al Pacino, it's an end of an era kind of film, he's kind of going down and it. And he's also kind of this white working class kind of hero. It's a very odd film in many ways that he's the one chanting it. I mean, I'm not a film critic, so I'm the wrong person to be analyzing it. To me, just personally, it's a very poignant kind of end of an era, dual legacy of Attica chanting of it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's what makes it so compelling. It's just this like desperate, almost pathetic. You're trying to align yourself with like actual revolutionaries in actual harsh conditions where you've sort of put yourself in a 2-bit bind of your own making. But yes,
you're not them.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious what the result of all of this is. You've talked about this participatory democracy and these demands that the people who were imprisoned were asking for. Obviously, it ends in this horrific bloodshed and violence. What becomes of the reforms that they were asking for?
Well, this is, of course, the $1 million question, and the 50th anniversary is such a great time to think about it. I just it's out today. I just did a piece in Time magazine on exactly this question. It's not good. It's not good. 50 years after Attica, my answer to it is that we are worse off. We are much worse off than we were 50 years ago, and there's a deep irony in it. On the one hand, the Attica brothers touch off, despite all the horror that happened to them personally, they inspired and touched off tremendous reforms, in fact. We got things like Estelle versus Gamble, which was the tremendous reform in the Supreme Court to medical care in prisons. We got relaxed visitation rules. We got better training for guards. We got all kinds of really positive things that came after Attica. So that's the upside. The problem is the backlash that we've been talking about all this time won the day. And because of that, we now have so many more people incarcerated than we ever did. The racial disparity is much, much more severe than it was. The amount of deaths in custody, the amount of solitary confinement people do, the number of children in prison, the amount of life sentences we hand out. The actual conditions are just so appreciably worse that means that the de jure, de facto problem with segregation in general is on steroids in prison. So at 50 years, it is time to resurrect what I think the Attica brothers called attention to 50 years ago, which is we can do better. God knows every other country has figured this out. Every other Western democracy has figured this out better than we did. We can do differently. We don't have to do it this way. And so that's the legacy of Attica that I'm hoping we're gonna think on at 50 years.
Well, your book is a big part of that, and we really appreciate you coming on. Again, Heather Ann Thompson, the book is Blood in the Water, The Attica Prison Uprising of 1971 and Its Legacy. Here we are 50 years later. But thank you so much for doing this. This was fantastic.
Thanks for having me on. Yeah. Take care.
And Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Kaula Nakua helps with transcripts. Julie Shapiro is executive producer for Radiotopia. Get in touch with us if you have any questions or comments or ideas for the show. You can email us, thisdaypod@gmail.com, or you can find a form at thisdaypod.com, where you can also get our full archives, transcripts, and learn lots more about the show. Follow us on social at thisdaypod on Instagram and Twitter, where we are posting stuff each and every day. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Over 40 prison staff were taken hostage, and Elliot Barkley became a charismatic spokesperson, issuing more than 24 demands.
The entire prison populace, that means each and every one of us here, have set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disregard for the lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States.
Radiotopia.